some people will vote for the smaller party within the right-wing religion.
WLRI LP, Gap, Pennsylvania.
Lose support. They will be worse off if, for example, the right-wing union of the religious parties will not pass the electoral threshold, which means that Likud lose support in the Knesset. So it's not so simple or so easy, this electoral game.
One interesting element in last night's midnight vote was that the Arab parties joined with the Likud in backing the snap election. Why is this, do you think? Why are the Arab parties so keen on a new election?
Well, I'm not sure if they're so keen, because as much as I understand, they waited to see whether there is a majority from new elections from the right-wing religious camp, and then they kind of joined. From their perspective, they joined. They didn't make a difference, but they joined in a symbolic way to claim that they are not happy with the election results. They want to try again, maybe gain more seats, and so that was probably their point. I would say that if they wanted to make a point and put themselves as different from both right and left or right and center, they should have probably either either not come to the vote, be absent, or they would abstain.
Professor Gidon Rahat from the Israel Democracy Institute and Jerusalem's Hebrew University. Former Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon was a Yisrael Beitenu Knesset member between the years 2009 and 2012 and knows party leader Victor Lieberman well. We asked him if he was surprised by Lieberman's behavior over the last few weeks.
I was surprised. I think that he miscalculated. I don't think that he had fathomed that Bibi would go all the way. His experience with Bibi for the last, with Prime Minister Netanyahu for the last 20 years was that when he pushes him and, goes on the brink, at the end of the day, Netanyahu capitulates. But I think here he crossed one bridge too far. He thought that was an opportunity for him to get more from Netanyahu, and this was not the case.
This morning, Mr. Lieberman gave a press conference in which he predicted that Yisrael Beitenu would get a huge boost in the next election because of what he termed his principled stand, pushing for the induction of the ultra-Orthodox. Do you think he might be right about this?
Well, it remains to be seen. Lieberman has always missed his predictions. Back in 2015, or 13, rather, when he joined the Likud, he promised for the joint list 46. They got only 31. In the last election, he promised at least 9. He got 5. So this could be wishful thinking, and we shall see. There is no doubt that his campaign will be for the secular. But has he done anything for them in the past 20 years? He has a long record. I'm not sure. And also this, I would say, this position of taking care of the secular is already taken by Yair Lapid. So if he maybe would go together with him, that could be interesting.
And do you think that's an option?
With Lieberman, when you are an opportunist, everything is an option.
One thing is clear from this episode. There's no love lost between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman. What lies behind the sometimes extremely bitter relationship between these two men? Where did it all start?
Well, this primordial, I would say, sin or problem was when Lieberman was fired by then Prime Minister Netanyahu in 1997, after there was an affair of some corruption, and I think he took it very much to heart. I don't think that he has ever come out of it, and so there is a lot of revenge in this move by Lieberman, as he saw that Netanyahu, or he thought Netanyahu is vulnerable. vulnerable and he was waiting for the right moment, but he buries this insult for the last 20 years.
Using your expertise as a former deputy foreign minister and Israel's ambassador to Washington, of course, where do you think last night's fiasco at the Knesset leaves the U.S. peace plan? Is it feasible that they could launch such a plan when Israel is now effectively in a new election campaign?
I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I think everything will be put on hold. I don't think this is very good for the country, for the region, and we need much more stability. And then again, points to maybe if I have any kind of intelligent insight here, is that certainly we need to change our electorate system and our voting system. Not that I think it will happen, but I think we should strive for it sooner than later.
Danny Ayalon. Israelis have expressed their shock and disapproval following last night's dramatic developments, which led to the dissolution of the Knesset and the calling of elections for September. One recurring concern, echoed both on the traditional and social media channels, has been the expected cost to the Israeli economy, estimated at 460 million shekels for the election itself, as well as a further 2 billion shekels loss as a result of a lost day of productivity, as Israelis will likely be given the day off work.
As every other citizen of Israel, I was very surprised and even shocked from what happened last night, that we're going again in 2 months into election, something that economically just destroyed a year of economy in Israel. And it's all because of personal reasons.
I'm totally in shock. I cannot believe that after the last elections, a month and a half later, we are back in the sandbox playing again, with no concern about all the finances wasted, about the energy and the time.
World country, when people are worried about their personalities instead of about the country's politics. It is time to stop hating each other, to start thinking what is best for the country.
More election analysis soon, but first, Idan Amedi with Bezman Ha'acharon, recently.
קצת קשה לי להגיע, אני הולך ומתנשף ומתחיל גם להזיע, כי בזמן האחרון גם קשה לי להסביע את הרצון המקולל לשרוף הכל בלי להודיע, כי בזמן האחרון אני נוגע לא נוגע, ואם נגיד את האמת אני הולך ומשתגע, כי בזמן האחרון קצת חשוך אתה שומע, אז תדליק כבר את האור, תעשה מה שאתה יודע. בזמן האחרון אנשים מוחאים כפיים, הם מסתכלים עליי קרוב בלבן של העיניים, אז בזמן האחרון נהייתי ביקורתי, ועשה לי קצת לחשוב עד כמה הייתי אמיתי, כי בזמן האחרון אני נוגע לא נוגע, ואם נגיד את האמת אני הולך ומשתגע, כי כי בזמן האחרון קצת חשוך אתה שומע, אז תדליק כבר את האור, תעשה מה שאתה יודע. אני נוגע, לא נוגע, ואם נגיד את האמת, אני הולך ומשתגע, כי בזמן האחרון קצת חשוך אתה שומע, אז תדליק כבר את האור, תעשה מה שאתה יודע.
You can now listen to the English news and all Kan Reka broadcasts live anywhere on your mobile phone on the Kan OD app. Download the app for access to all programs, live broadcasts, and a variety of music channels all in one place. Look for Kan OD in the app stores.
How did Israel end up having another election just 51 days after the previous one took place? Yochanan Plessner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute, spoke with the Israel Project following last night's dramatic Knesset vote.
If we analyze the sort of month and a half or 2 months after the campaign, we can identify a few things. Number one, I think that when we look at the right-wing plus ultra-Orthodox bloc as a bloc, we understand that actually the what ties it together is it's not as homogeneous as one would have imagined and would have thought. Traditionally, the ultra-Orthodox parties were not part of the right-wing bloc. They were available for the highest bidder and would shift between parties. Over the past decade, the ultra-Orthodox parties moved more to the right wing for a variety of reasons, including Prime Minister Netanyahu's extreme generosity towards their claims. But what we're seeing, and Lieberman's demands are a reflection of it, that there is a strong, significant group of secular Israelis who are self-identify themselves as right-wing. They want the right-wing government, but they do not want a government that succumbs and gives in and allows the ultra-Orthodox to call the shots in the entire realm of religion and state and domestic agenda. And that coincided with Mr. Lieberman's need to, in a sense, reinvent himself after 2 election campaigns where he barely crossed the threshold and discovered that his constituency of former immigrants from the Soviet Union is dwindling because increasingly those immigrants are no longer immigrants but rather Israelis, and their voting patterns begin to emulate the voting patterns of Israelis. So Lieberman understood that he needs to carve a new niche for himself. He's a skilled, savvy, experienced politician, and that's why he was in a win-win situation. Either he causes Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox to cave in and demonstrates that he has a constituency and leadership in this area, or he goes for an early election after he fought on a principle that is important to many in his in the right-wing base.
Is there any reason to believe that the results of the upcoming elections will be any different than those we just had?
Well, no, it's a very it's a very difficult question to answer. The other main factor that took place over the past 2 months is what we saw, the importance of the Netanyahu's legal personal situation affecting the political system in two ways. Number one, his degrees of freedom for maneuver were extremely limited because he couldn't lure any partners from the center. So that caused both the ultra-Orthodox and the other right-wing parties to raise the price, realizing that Netanyahu has no options and very limited options. Number two, he exposed his legal plan. Although he denied it before the election, now it became very clear that he wants to initiate radical initiatives vis-a-vis the judiciary, its independence, its scope of authorities, in order to enable immunity. So those two changes will very much affect what we're going to see in the next couple of months. It's clear that if the mandate would have gone back now to the president and he would have assigned anyone else from the Likud, it would take less than a day or perhaps one phone call to form a government between Likud and Blue and White, a very stable, mainstream, center-right government. But that was not an option as long as Netanyahu leads the Likud, and therefore he has no interest in such a coalition that will not pave his legal way and solve his legal woes. And obviously Blue and White would not want to sit with a prime minister that is about to be indicted. So those options were closed, and that very much is an important factor that explains what we just saw.
But again, I'll stress you on the previous questions. If the results are going to be the same because of the proximity, because we're having two elections in the same year, will we then have a risk of entering another political crisis with a deadlock in forming a coalition in 3 months' time from now, 4 months' time?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily assume that the outcome of the upcoming election would be the same. On the one hand, we know of a psychological phenomenon of people, generally voters, justifying for themselves their choice and sticking to it after the election. And in this respect, one would expect not a big change. However, number one, there might be a change in the turnout of the Arab voters. That was very low this time, and if the Arab parties would unite and so on, there might be a different momentum. It might affect, 2 or 3 seats on the center left plus Arab parties bloc. On the other hand, we might expect that the right wing lost something like 5 seats this time as a result of Feiglin and Bennett not crossing the threshold. So the right wing is expected to or might not lose as many votes. So that might actually strengthen the right. So those are two conflicting trends that we might expect. And we don't know what will be with Lieberman, whether he will grow, and that will make it difficult for Netanyahu to again negotiate with him, or whether he will not cross the threshold. And finally, since Netanyahu exposed his radical plans against the judiciary and in the institutions of agencies of rule of law, that might also affect the voting pattern of some soft right voters that would not feel comfortable with that, including those who voted for Kahlon's party, that was his agenda and now he vanished, and that might actually lead to the movement of votes from the right-wing bloc to the center-left. But that's just a speculation. So those are the main 3 factors that might generate a different outcome in this election, and it's so it's too early to speculate about forming the next government. But even if Lieberman ends up with a hefty amount of seats, he might, him and Netanyahu have a long history of fighting off and then forming alliances together. They're very, experienced politicians without many emotions at play.
Yochanan Plessner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute. These are the stories making headlines in Israel at this hour. The Likud and Yisrael Beitenu blame each other for forcing the snap election in September. Prime Minister Netanyahu is likely to ask the Attorney General for a further delay in the hearing in the corruption charges against him because of the election. President Trump expresses disappointment over Netanyahu's failure to form a coalition. U.S. envoys Kushner and Greenblatt tell Prime Minister Netanyahu the Bahrain summit will take place next month as planned. And the weather cooler tomorrow, but still extremely hot inland and on the hills. Sources close to the Prime Minister have begun exploratory contacts with Ayelet Shaked to reserve her a slot on the Likud list. At the same time, other senior officials in the party are reportedly working against giving her a prominent place from which she can battle for leadership in the era after Netanyahu. A Cannes reporter says Shaked's former political partner, Naftali Bennett, is interested in aligning with another right-wing party, like the Union of Right-Wing Parties, though political sources say he's also interested in joining the Likud. Knesset member Ahmed Tibi says that immediately after last night's plenum vote, the four Arab parties, Chadash, Ta'al, Ra'am and Balad, began contacts to resurrect the joint list. He said the results of the last night's vote will serve as the results of the last vote in the elections will serve as the basis for establishing the list, and all of the parties will benefit. In the wake of the Knesset's dissolution and his failure to form a government, Prime Minister Netanyahu will likely ask Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit in the next few days to postpone his hearing once again. His request will most likely be denied. Mandelblit informed Prime Minister Netanyahu's lawyers last week that he had partially acceded to their request and postponed the hearing to October the 2nd instead of July the 10th, the original date. Mandelblit also decided that if it were necessary to hold another hearing, a date would be set for the following week. The hearings for Noni Moses in Case 2000 and for Iris and Shaul Elovich in Case 4000 were also postponed to August the 15th. The Attorney General gave Netanyahu 2 weeks to respond whether he intended to attend the hearing on the new date and stressed that there would be no more postponements, as this was counter to the public interest. Mandelblit also confirmed that Netanyahu had asked to postpone the hearing by a year, as first reported by Channel 13 News. How much will the elections cost? Orly Ades, Director General of the Central Election Committee, said she will ask the Knesset Finance Committee for a 25% increase in the budget for managing the upcoming election. The committee's budget for the allocations in April were 283 million shekels. She said the additional funds are needed because of the additional cost in having to rush supply orders. She said money is also needed to pay election committee workers overtime. And unfortunately, there will not be time to implement lessons from the previous election campaign. She said one of the main challenges in campaign propaganda on social networks, which was addressed by the committee chair, Justice Hanan Meltzer. Prime Minister Netanyahu's oldest son received a social media drubbing after claiming that during the coalition talks in 2009, Yisrael Beitenu leader Avigdor Lieberman's most adamant demand was that Yehuda Weinstein be appointed Attorney General so as to clear him in the criminal investigations against the politician. Weinstein said the remarks were false. He didn't know Lieberman until his own appointment, and that the decision to close the investigation was solely professional. Yair Netanyahu, for his part, qualified his statement, saying that he was a high school student at the time, uninvolved in politics, and that his comments were based on public discourse at the time surrounding publication of a book about Lieberman. Meretz party leader Tamar Zanderberg has called on the Attorney General to order an investigation against the Prime Minister and the Yisrael Beitenu leader of the assertions made in Yair Netanyahu's tweet. American President Donald Trump says he is sorry to hear that Israel will face another election. It's too bad what happened in Israel, he told reporters at the White House. It looked like a total win for Netanyahu, praising the Israeli leader as a great guy. They're back at the election stage. That is too bad, Trump said. A delegation of senior American officials from the Trump administration arrived this morning in Israel for discussions ahead of the diplomatic summit in Bahrain next month. The summit, which is being designated as an economic workshop, is expected to focus on economic initiatives for the Palestinians and the Arab world ahead of the release of the diplomatic elements of the American peace plan. An Israeli delegation is expected to take part in the Bahrain summit, even though Israel does not have diplomatic ties with the Gulf state. The American delegation that arrived in Israel was led by President Donald Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as well as the White House's Middle East envoy, Jason Greenblatt. Prime Minister Netanyahu greeted the delegation at his Jerusalem residence in a brief joint statement before continuing to a private meeting that lasted some 3 hours.
It's always a great pleasure to welcome Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt to Israel, to Jerusalem, and to discuss our common efforts for prosperity, security, and peace. I have to say that I'm tremendously encouraged by everything that I hear about how the United States under President Trump is working to bring allies together in this region against common challenges, but also to seize common opportunities. And even though we had a little event last night, that's not going to stop us. We're going to continue working together. And we had a great, productive meeting, which reaffirms that the alliance between the United States and America has never been stronger, and it's going to get even stronger.
Thank you. And I want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for his gracious hospitality. I came with greetings from President Trump for you and for all the people of Israel. This was my first time in Israel since the President recognized the Golan Heights, which was a very important announcement. The security of Israel is something that's critical to the relationship between America and Israel, and also very important to the President and his heart. And we appreciate all of your efforts to strengthen the relationship between our two countries. It's never been stronger. And we're very excited about all the potential that lies ahead for Israel, for the relationship, and for the whole region. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared.
A State Department official told Can Radio that the administration intended to hold the economic conference in Bahrain as planned in spite of the vote to dissolve the Knesset and call a new election. The official said further that the peace plan would be made public at the right time, when it had the best possible chance. One of the major issues during the last election campaign and the now failed coalition negotiations was a proposal for structural reform that would limit the Supreme Court's ability to review or strike down Knesset legislation. The election promise, proposed by several of the right-wing parties, was heavily criticized as being anti-democratic. During a round-table event held today at the Israel Democracy Institute, former Justice of the Supreme Court, Dorit Beinish, speculated about what she thought was behind the right-wing party's attempt to reform the courts.
The administrative judicial review, this is what bothers the government and the politicians, and not the constitutional review. We had 18 cases reviewing a Knesset decision that interfered with mostly not very important for the Knesset decisions. And we had nothing against those decisions. And if you accept, and this is another argument between some who say that we have to respect the majoritarian principle, but in a system that you have constitutional review, many cases are interfering with legislation. And here since 1992 until today, 18 cases, we didn't hear about them. We only heard about the case of the asylum seekers. That's it. Which means this is not really the true story. The true story We want to govern. We don't want you to review and to strike down decisions of the government. And I think that in this, we have a wonderful, very important tradition since the court started of decisions protecting rights of people, not only minority, but people who are not protected by the system. And this is the real role of a court. To change this means to destroy the system.
Former Chief Justice Dorit Beinish. Now subliminal with the Ultras. Florentine.
כל יום כשהיא מטיילת עם הכלב אף אחד לא נשאר אדיש בפלורנטין הגיל באף וקעקוע על הרגל וזה לא מזיז לה כל המבטים כי היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה רגילה לזה רגילה לזה זה לא מזיז היא רגילה מהולי יש לה דאווין של נסיכה מבית קרדשיין אין אחד שלא קופץ על זה ישר כמו איזה צ'קי נולדה עם כסף בידיים הרופאים אומרים זה money הגוף שלה כמו גיטרה בת למטה קצת יותר בעיקר שנוח לך לשבת איפה הקץ התמונה לא בסדר נכנס לדירה והערת את החדר מבט בין כולנו ורק עברת מטר כל הבנות מתקפלות כמו בסגר יש פה מלכה מי ישים לה את הכתר הרמנו מבצע כמו צבא כמו בחבר קולט המשחק שלך תפסתי את הסנטר צמצם לכיוון בה בקטע של גנגסטר השברות הרמה שלך מעבר הגעת לי לפריים ומחקת את היתר חולם לייצר אל הלב שלך גשר מהלילה לתת שם בסתר נשבע אני רועד משקשק כמו שייקר לא נותן פצח קטן לאף הייטר אם יהיה צ'אנס אני נועל את הקשר לנצח forever and ever and ever and ever בגוף שלי שלא על התדר הפוקוס ברור נקודה סוף ואנדר בוער זה בוער וגובר נראה גבר והיא לביאה לא כבשה ולא צמר בפוש מינימלי כמו שער של בייזר מוזג לנו צ'ייסר ואף על הדיונות האלה כמו רייזר המוח בפייזר אני לא משתחרר סטוריטי בייזר או חשמל עובר בגוף משחק שקוף פוף הלב שלי חשוף בא בטירוף עוד מהלך של אלוף תני לי לטעום מעצוף איזה כישוף בשנייה אחת לימדה אותי לה כל יום כשהיא מטיילת עם הכלב אף אחד לא נשאר אדיש בפלורנטין הגיל באף וקעקוע על הרגל וזה לא מזיז לה כל המבטים כי היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה רגילה לזה רגילה לזה זה לא מזיז היא רגילה מהולי כמה יופי הוא בפלורנטין הוליווד הולי שיט איך עוצרים את הזמן גלי לי את הטריק סובבת לי את הראש בדוק יהיה פה קליק 1.75 של קריזמה אתה יכול להמשיך לנסות לא מזיז לה 10 קילו לפחות ביטחון לעצמי שלה אני לא בא בדיס אבל די עם הדיסטנס זה הפן והפוני הג'ין והטוני כקשר ביני לבין האפלטוני 10 מ-10 מ-10 ל-10 גובר הסיכוי פה לגבר כמוני מברים לברים חולים על קמפרי חיים בסרט שסטרים אנחנו נתניה כפרה ברברים תקשיבי זה לא בדיוק גזע ארי אנחנו חולים על בנות כמוך יודעים שאת כמה רמות מעל אני ליגה א' ואת מונדיאל יש בך את כל מה שגבר שאל זה הוויסקי הקולה מדברת בדולר רק צריכה להצביע ויש לה ביד את כל מה שיבוא לה אז תבוא אל הקלאב אורחת כבוד של האוטוס וסם עוד לפני שתספיקי לומר מה רצית שמפניירת חכה בשולחן אנחנו לא דתיים יש לך גוף אלוהי שגם אתה איש תעשה לו פולחן בוא נתחיל את הפן תעשי לי סימן כי אני כבר יותר ממוכן אז תשימי את הרדבול תבוד כאן אנחנו הצוות שבא לעבוד כאן נראה לך שחם כי יש לעבוד כאן אני האחרון שהולך לעמוד כאן אז תמזור לה את הקו את היין אחת משלנו נרים לה לחיים עכשיו תסתכלי לי לתוך העיניים תגידי מה לא התרשמת עדיין כל יום כשהיא מטיילת אף אחד לא נשאר אדיש בפלורנטין הגיל באף וקעקוע על הרגל וזה לא מזיז לה כל המבטים היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה היא כבר רגילה לזה רגילה לזה רגילה לזה רגילה לזה זה לא מזיז היא רגילה
The IDF has sealed off the last offensive tunnel that Hezbollah dug, the longest and deepest of the 6 tunnels that were discovered in Operation Northern Shield. The other 5 tunnels have already been destroyed or sealed off. The latest tunnel was approximately 780 meters long, and only the end crosses into Israeli territory. The opening of the tunnel on the Israeli side will not be closed, so that diplomats and foreign journalists can be brought to the scene for public diplomacy purposes. The IDF knows about other tunnels that Hezbollah dug, but all are in Lebanese territory and do not cross the border. With exponentially more rockets and with Iranian assistance, Sinwar said. He also criticized the Trump administration's during the transport of civilians to a Cypriot port.